Dust hung in the dry summer air of Clayton County, Iowa, July 1998. Nearly 200 people had gathered along the uneven dirt track that cut through Henderson's old fairgrounds, a place where pride was louder than engines and reputations could be built or destroyed in a single afternoon. At the center of it all stood Ethan Wallace, 38 years old, broad shoulders, crisp white shirt tucked into expensive denim. A man who didn't just own land, he owned attention. His family had dominated farming contracts across 3 counties for over a decade. His machinery, always brand new, always the best money could buy. And today, he had something to prove. Ethan rested his hand on the gleaming hood of his pride and joy, a John Deere 8400, freshly polished, its green paint reflecting the sunlight like a mirror. The machine looked unstoppable, powerful, perfect. $10,000, he had said earlier that morning, loud enough for everyone to hear. That's what I'm putting down. Anyone thinks they've got a machine that can beat this, step forward. At first, no one did, because nobody was foolish enough to challenge him. Nobody, except one man. From the far edge of the crowd, where the dust settled heavier and the whispers stayed quieter, an old figure stepped forward, slow, measured, almost forgotten by time itself. His name was Harold Benton, 72 years old, a retired farmer, or at least that's what people believed. His clothes were worn, faded by years of sun and soil. His boots carried the weight of decades. And his eyes held something no one in that crowd could quite read. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. Because behind him, rattling, coughing, and barely holding itself together, was a machine that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. A Farmall M, built sometime in the early 1940s. Rust clung to its body like scars from another lifetime. The paint was chipped beyond recognition. One of the headlights hung slightly crooked, as if it had given up years ago. When the engine idled, it didn't roar. It struggled, and yet... Harold walked up to Ethan like a man who had already made peace with the outcome. "I'll take that bet," he said quietly. The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone actually clapped sarcastically. Another man shouted, "Harold, that thing won't even make it halfway." Even Ethan couldn't hide his grin. "You serious?" he asked, almost amused. "That piece of junk against this?" Harold simply nodded, but what nobody knew at that moment was, this wasn't just about a race. This was something much deeper, something older, and something far more personal than anyone could imagine. The rules were simple. A straight 300-yard pull across uneven dirt. Each tractor would be hooked to the same weighted sled. Nearly 15,000 pounds of resistance. The goal wasn't speed. It was strength, pure, unforgiving power, the kind that separates machines from legends. Ethan went first. The John Deere roared to life like a beast awakened. The ground trembled beneath its tires as he revved the engine. People stepped back instinctively. This wasn't just machinery. It was dominance on display. When the signal dropped, Ethan pushed forward. The sled jerked, then moved, and once it started moving, it didn't stop. The Deere pulled like it had something to prove, carving deep, aggressive tracks into the dirt. The engine screamed with confidence. Every foot it gained pushed the crowd further into silence. 50 yards, 100, 200. By the time Ethan crossed the 280-yard mark, people were already shaking their heads. "That's it," someone muttered. "Game over." He finally stopped at 291 yards, an incredible distance, a near-perfect run. Ethan stepped down from the tractor, wiping his hands, already smiling like a man who had just secured $10,000. He didn't even look at Harold, because in his mind, this was already finished. But what happened next made the entire county question everything they thought they knew about machines and the men who drive them. Harold climbed onto the Farmall slowly. No rush, no show, just quiet purpose. He adjusted his cap, placed both hands on the worn steering wheel. For a moment, he didn't start the engine. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered something. No one could hear it, but it didn't sound like a prayer. It sounded like a memory. Then he turned the ignition. The Farmall coughed violently. Once, twice, a puff of thick black smoke shot out from the exhaust, drawing laughter from the crowd again. "Come on, old man," someone yelled. "Don't break it before the race even starts." But Harold didn't react. His eyes were different now, focused, sharp, like a man who wasn't here to entertain, but to settle something long overdue. The engine steadied, still rough, still uneven, but alive. When the chain was hooked and the signal was given, something shifted, not in the machine, in the air itself. Harold pushed forward. At first, nothing happened. The sled didn't move. The tractor groaned like it was resisting its own existence. The tires spun slightly, kicking up dust but gaining no ground. The crowd began to murmur. Some laughed again. Ethan folded his arms, already turning away, and then something impossible happened. The wheels stopped slipping. The engine tone changed, not louder, but deeper, heavier, as if something inside that rusted machine had just awakened. The sled moved, 1 inch, then another, slow, painfully slow. But it was moving, and with every inch, the laughter faded. Harold leaned forward slightly, his grip tightening. The Farmall didn't surge. It crawled, but it never stopped. 50 yards. The crowd went quiet. 100 yards. People started stepping closer. 150. A man near the front whispered, "That's not possible," because what nobody realized yet was that this old machine wasn't just fighting the weight in front of it. It was carrying something from the past, something buried, something Ethan Wallace had no idea he had just challenged. And as the Farmall kept pulling, inch by inch, Harold's eyes locked forward, not on the finish line, but on something only he could see. And that's when the first crack in Ethan's confidence began to show. Ethan's smile faded, just slightly. At first he told himself it meant nothing, a slow start, a lucky grip. Maybe the old man had somehow found a patch of firmer ground. That was all. That had to be it. But then the Farmall crossed 200 yards, and the silence became heavy. No cheers, no laughter, just the sound of that old engine, deep, rhythmic, almost unnatural now, echoing across the fairgrounds. Harold didn't look left or right. He didn't acknowledge the crowd. He didn't even seem to be reacting to the moment at all. He just kept pulling, steady, unbreakable. 210 yards, 220. Ethan stepped forward now, his arms no longer folded. His jaw tightened as his eyes locked onto the back tires of that rusted machine. "They're going to slip," he muttered under his breath. "They have to." But they didn't. Instead, they dug deeper. Each rotation pressed harder into the earth, like the tractor was finding strength from somewhere beneath the ground itself. And that's when something even stranger happened. A man in the crowd, an older man, probably in his late 60s, took off his hat slowly. His name was Walter Briggs. He had lived in Clayton County his entire life, seen every fair, every competition, every machine worth remembering. And as he watched Harold Benton inch closer to Ethan's mark, his face changed, not with excitement, with recognition. "No," Walter whispered. The man beside him glanced over. "What?" Walter didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the Farmall's engine, on the way it pulsed, the exact rhythm of its strain, the almost impossible consistency. "I've heard that engine before," Walter finally said, his voice low. The man frowned. "What are you talking about? That thing looks like it came out of a grave." Walter shook his head slowly. "That's just it," he swallowed. "It should have." Back on the track, Harold crossed 250 yards. Now the crowd couldn't stay silent anymore. People started shouting, some in disbelief, some in excitement, others just trying to understand what they were witnessing. "Keep going, come on, that's impossible." But Harold didn't hear them. Or maybe he chose not to, because in his mind the fairgrounds weren't there anymore. The crowd wasn't there. Even Ethan Wallace didn't exist. Instead, he was somewhere else. Another year, another field, the air colder, the ground wetter, and the stakes far higher than $10,000. October 1907 County. A different kind of crowd. Back then, tractor pulls weren't just entertainment. They were survival. Contracts were won there. Land disputes were settled there. A man's reputation could decide whether his family ate that winter or didn't. And standing at the center of that memory was a younger Harold Benton, strong, determined, proud, and across from him, a man named Richard Wallace, Ethan's father. The crowd back in 1998 didn't know any of this. They didn't know that the very ground beneath their feet had once witnessed something unfinished, something unresolved. Because in 1976, Harold Benton had already beaten a Wallace. Fair and square. Same kind of pull, same kind of machine, and the same kind of silence when it was over. But what happened after that victory was never spoken about. Not publicly, not officially, and certainly not by Harold. Back in the present, 260 yards, the Farmall groaned, the metal frame trembling now under the strain. For the first time, it looked like it might actually fail. A sharp crack echoed from somewhere near the rear axle. The crowd gasped. Ethan's eyes lit up again. "There it is," he whispered. "This is where it ends." But Harold didn't slow down. If anything, he leaned forward more. His boots pressed harder. His hands tightened around the wheel like it was the only thing anchoring him to reality. "Not this time," he murmured under his breath. And suddenly, the engine roared, not louder, not faster, but stronger. As if something inside had just broken free, the Farmall surged. Not by much, but enough. 270 yards, 280. Now Ethan was no longer standing still. He stepped closer to the track, his eyes wide, disbelief creeping in despite everything he told himself. "This isn't real," he said, but it was. And worse, it wasn't luck. Because what nobody had noticed yet, not even Walter, was a small, almost invisible detail hidden beneath layers of rust and time. Something etched into the side of the engine block, faint, worn, but still there. A marking that didn't belong to any standard Farmall model. A modification, a signature, from a man who had disappeared 20 years ago. Under circumstances Clayton County had quietly buried. 285 yards. The crowd was shouting now, louder than ever before. People were running alongside the track. Some were filming on old camcorders, hands shaking, because they knew. They were witnessing something that would be talked about for decades, or avoided completely, depending on who you asked. Walter suddenly stepped forward, pushing past people. "I need to see that engine," he said urgently. "Move!" But no one was really listening anymore, because all eyes were locked on one thing, the finish line, and the impossible question hanging in the air. Could that broken, forgotten machine actually beat 291 yards? Harold's breathing grew heavier. His hands trembled slightly now, not from fear, from memory, because as the Farmall pushed forward, inch by inch, he wasn't just pulling a sled, he was dragging something buried for over 2 decades, back into the light. 288 yards, the tractor shook violently. Another crack, louder this time. Something was breaking. Metal fatigue, age, limits finally catching up. Ethan took a step closer, then another. "Come on," he whispered now. Not cheering, not mocking, just needing it to stop, because deep down a thought had started to form. A dangerous one. What if this isn't just a race? Harold's eyes flickered for a brief moment, and for the first time since the run began, he looked up, not at the finish line, not at the crowd, but directly at Ethan Wallace. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, Ethan felt something he couldn't explain, not fear, not exactly, but recognition. like he had just stepped into a story that had started long before him. And then, 290 yards. The Farmall screamed. The entire machine shuddered as if it was about to tear itself apart. The crowd held its breath. One more foot, one more inch, and everything would change. But just before it could cross Ethan's mark, the engine suddenly cut. A violent silence slammed into the air. The tractor jerked once and stopped. For a split second, no one moved, no one spoke. The sudden silence felt louder than the engines ever had. Dust slowly drifted past the stalled Farmall, settling over its rusted body like a curtain falling on something unfinished. 290 yards, just 1 yard short. One. The crowd exhaled all at once, some in relief, others in disbelief. He didn't make it," someone said quietly. Another voice followed, louder this time, trying to bring logic back into the moment. "It's over. Ethan wins." But the words didn't land the way they were supposed to, because no one was cheering. Not really. They were looking at Harold, still sitting there, still holding the wheel, not moving. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. For a moment his confidence returned. You could see it in the way his shoulders lifted slightly, in the way his posture straightened again. He took a few steps forward, clapping his hands once, forcing a smile. "Well," he said, loud enough for people to hear, "that was impressive. Didn't think you'd even get halfway, old man." A few scattered laughs followed, weak, uncertain, because something still felt off. Ethan walked closer now, boots crunching against the dirt, eyes fixed on the stopped tractor. "You came close," he added, almost casually, "but close doesn't win bets." No response. Harold hadn't moved. His head was slightly lowered, his hands still gripping the wheel like he was waiting for something or listening. Walter finally reached the edge of the track, slightly out of breath. "Harold!" he called out. "Turn it off!" But Harold didn't react. Walter's eyes narrowed. "That's not right," he muttered, "because the engine wasn't dead. Not completely. If you stood close enough, you could hear it, a faint, uneven ticking, like something deep inside was still trying to move, still trying to breathe." Ethan noticed it too. He stepped closer, now only a few feet away from the Farmall. "You're done," he said, his voice firmer now. "It's over." Still nothing. And then Harold spoke, softly, almost like he wasn't talking to Ethan at all. "You always did stop too early." Ethan frowned. "What?" Harold slowly lifted his head. His eyes weren't tired anymore. They were clear, sharp, and locked directly onto Ethan. "Your father," Harold said quietly. The words hit harder than expected. Ethan's expression changed instantly. "Don't—" he started, but stopped himself. The crowd shifted again. The energy had changed. This wasn't about money anymore. Walter stepped even closer now, staring at the side of the engine. And then he saw it. That marking, faint, scratched into the metal beneath layers of rust and oil. His breath caught. "No way," he whispered. He reached out, wiping away dirt with his hand, revealing more of it. A name, or what was left of one. Calhoun. Walter stumbled back slightly. "Harold, you didn't—" But Harold didn't look at him. His eyes never left Ethan. "You ever wonder," Harold continued, his voice calm, controlled, "why your father never entered another pull after 76? Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's got nothing to do with this." "It has everything to do with this." The words were sharper now, heavier, and for the first time, people in the crowd started remembering. Whispers began to spread. 1976. Wasn't there some kind of incident? I heard someone got hurt. No, worse than that. Ethan shook his head, trying to dismiss it. My father walked away because he didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Harold's expression didn't change. No, he said quietly. He walked away because he knew what happened that day. Wasn't supposed to happen. The ticking inside the engine grew louder, more irregular now, almost like a heartbeat, struggling. Walter stepped forward again, urgency in his voice. "Harold, you need to shut it down. Whatever's inside that engine—" "It's been waiting long enough," Harold interrupted. And then he moved, for the first time since the tractor stopped. Harold reached down and adjusted something near the base of the steering column. A small lever, old, worn, almost hidden. Ethan noticed immediately. "What are you doing?" No answer. The crowd leaned in. Even the wind seemed to hold back. Harold pulled the lever. Nothing happened. For a second, 2 seconds. And then the engine exploded back to life. A violent, thunderous roar tore through the silence, sending people stumbling backward in shock. Black smoke burst from the exhaust, thicker than before, darker. The entire tractor shook, as if it had just been forced awake against its will. "What the hell?" Ethan stepped back instinctively. The sled jerked, not forward at first, but then it moved, again, on its own. "That's not possible. He's not even accelerating," because Harold's foot wasn't pressing down. His hands weren't guiding. The Farmall was moving anyway, dragging the sled forward like something unseen had taken control. 291 yards, the exact mark Ethan had set. The crowd held its breath again. This time, no one spoke. No one dared. Walter's voice trembled. "Harold, what did you put in that engine?" Harold's eyes flickered for just a moment, and when he answered, it wasn't what anyone expected. "I didn't put anything in it," he said. "I brought something back." Ethan shook his head, backing away slowly now. "This is a trick. This is some kind of—" But he couldn't finish, because the tractor didn't stop. 292 yards. It passed Ethan's mark. Clean, undeniable, and still, it kept going. The metal screamed under the pressure. Bolts began to snap. The rear axle cracked again, louder than before. Parts of the machine looked like they were seconds away from tearing apart completely. But it didn't slow down. It refused to— Harold stood up slightly now, still holding the wheel but not controlling it. Just witnessing it, like he had been waiting for this moment for over 20 years. "Back then," he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos, "he couldn't finish the pull." Ethan froze. "What are you talking about?" Harold's gaze hardened. "Your father stopped the machine." A pause. "I didn't." And suddenly, the truth began to surface. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to send a ripple of unease through everyone watching. Because if what Harold was saying was real, then this wasn't just a machine finishing a race. This was something that had been interrupted, finally completing what it started. The Farmall surged again, harder this time, as if whatever force was driving it had just broken past its last limit. The sled dragged violently behind it, carving deep scars into the dirt. Walter staggered back, shaking his head. No, this isn't right. That engine was destroyed in 76. I saw it myself." His voice dropped to a whisper. "We all did. And yet, here it was, alive, stronger than ever, pulling beyond reason, beyond logic, beyond time itself." Harold's grip tightened again, not to control it, but to hold on. Because now, even he didn't know how far it was going to go. And somewhere deep inside that roaring machine, something that had been buried for decades, was no longer silent. The ground began to tremble, not violently but steadily, like a deep vibration rising from beneath the fairgrounds themselves. The Farmall kept moving. 295 yards, metal tore. A long, sharp ripping sound echoed as one of the rear mounts, partially snapped, tilting the body just enough to make the entire machine look unstable, unnatural. But it didn't collapse. It corrected itself, as if something inside refused to let it fail. People started backing away now. Instinctively, no one was cheering anymore. This wasn't TA competition. This was something else, something no one had signed up to witness. Ethan's breathing grew uneven. His eyes were wide, locked onto the tractor like it might suddenly turn toward him. This isn't possible," he whispered again. But now there was no confidence behind it. Only doubt, only fear, because deep down, something Harold had said was starting to connect. Fragments, memories he wasn't even sure were his, stories his father never fully told. A night in 1976 that always ended in silence whenever it was mentioned. "Stop it!" Ethan suddenly shouted, his voice cracked through the chaos. "Shut it down!" But Harold didn't respond. Not immediately, because Harold was no longer looking at the track. He was looking past it, through it, like he could see something no one else could. The Farmall pushed forward again. 298 yards. The sled groaned louder than ever before, resisting with everything it had left. But it didn't matter, because whatever was pulling it now wasn't bound by normal limits. Walter grabbed Ethan's arm suddenly. "You need to listen," he said urgently. "Your father, he didn't just walk away that year." Ethan yanked his arm back. "I don't care about—" "You should," Walter snapped, and for the first time, Ethan stopped, because Walter wasn't guessing, he knew something. Something real. That engine, Walter pointed toward the Farmall. It belonged to Thomas Calhoun. The name hit the air like a dropped weight. A few older people in the crowd stiffened. Some stepped back even further, because they remembered, even if they never spoke about it. Ethan frowned. "Who the hell is that?" Walter stared at him. "You really don't know, do you?" The tractor roared again, louder now, angrier. 299 yards. "Thomas Calhoun was the best mechanic this county ever had," Walter said quickly. "He built engines that didn't just run. They dominated." Ethan's eyes flickered back to the machine. "And in 76, Walter continued, his voice tightening, "he built one for Harold." Harold's jaw clenched slightly, but he didn't interrupt. "And it worked," Walter said. "That day, Harold was winning. Everyone knew it. Even your father knew it." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No. But something went wrong," Walter pressed. "Right near the end of the pull, the engine started pushing past its limits, doing things it shouldn't have been able to do." The Farmall lurched forward again. The front lifted slightly for a split second before slamming back down. 300 yards. And then... Walter hesitated. His voice dropped. "Your father stepped in." Ethan's heart pounded now. "What do you mean, stepped in?" Walter looked at him carefully. "Richard Wallace ordered the run to be stopped." Harold finally spoke again. "He didn't order it," he said quietly. "He forced it." Ethan turned toward him. "That's not true." Harold's eyes met his. "He cut the line." The words hung there, heavy, unavoidable. Walter nodded slowly. "The chain snapped, but not from tension." Ethan's breathing stopped. "It was sabotaged." The crowd murmured again, louder this time. Pieces were falling into place. Stories long buried, rising back up. "Calhoun tried to stop it," Walter continued. "He ran onto the track, trying to shut the engine down before it tore itself apart." Harold's grip tightened again. "But he didn't make it," Walter said. A long silence. "What happened to him?" Ethan asked, barely above a whisper. Harold answered this time, his voice steady, cold. "He got caught." Ethan's face went pale. "In the engine," Harold continued, "in the failure your father created." The tractor screamed, louder than ever before, as if reacting to the words themselves. 301 yards. Walter swallowed. "They said it was an accident." Harold shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "It was unfinished." Ethan staggered back a step. "No, my father wouldn't—" "He did what powerful men always do," Harold cut in. "He chose control over truth." The Farmall surged one final time, violently, uncontrollably. The entire frame twisted as the remaining mounts gave way. Metal tore apart. Bolts exploded outward. The engine roared at a pitch no machine should ever reach. And then it stopped. Not like before, not abruptly, but completely, as if whatever had been driving it had finally let go. The tractor rolled half a foot more, and settled, 302 yards. Silence, absolute, heavy silence. Smoke drifted upward into the fading sky. The smell of burnt oil and metal filled the air. No one moved. No one spoke. Harold slowly released the steering wheel. His hands trembled now, not from effort, from something else, something ending. He climbed down from the tractor, step by step, carefully, like the weight he had carried for decades was finally shifting. Ethan stood frozen, his mind racing. Everything he believed about his father, about that day, collapsing in front of him. Walter looked at the engine one last time, then at Harold. "It's over, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Harold didn't answer immediately. He walked to the side of the tractor and gently placed his hand on the scorched metal. For a brief moment, the air felt still again, calm, and then he nodded. Ethan took a slow step forward. "You planned this," he said. Harold looked at him. Not angry, not proud, just certain. "No," he said, "I waited." A long pause followed. For it to finish. The crowd began to slowly disperse. Not loudly, not excited, just quietly. Like people leaving something they didn't fully understand, but knew they would never forget. Ethan remained where he was, looking at the broken tractor, at the marks carved into the earth, at the line that had finally been crossed. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about what had been buried to make sure he always could. Behind him, Harold Benton walked away from the fairgrounds, slow, steady, and for the first time in over 20 years, with nothing left pulling him back.